Hey, let's wait a couple of more minutes. Let's see if others will join.
Hi, everybody.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, seems it's working.
Do you know if Kevin is going to join?
Kevin just messaged. He said he would join. He's just struggling to get his son to bed for his afternoon nap, so he'll be a bit late.
Okay, no problems.
Okay.
We practically, anyway, for today had only one topic, which was from the past about this caching.
You also mentioned that something about the merge requests or pull requests, but that I think we discussed offline, but maybe we can just discuss it in general as well, right?
Yeah, we can do it, yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure how long Kevin will still be, so I don't think we need to wait for him to start discussions.
Yeah, maybe we can start.
Okay.
So, which topic do you prefer first? We can talk first about
maybe let's start with the lightweight, I suppose, lightweight one, which is the pull requests, and then in case then we finish off with the one on the parsing or caching of the parsing of the CDI JSON files.
Okay.
In case Kevin has something to add and does end up joining in a little bit.
All right, so regarding pull request and overall merge criteria, so I think everyone in this group, or at least like people who are part of CDI organizations, we have permissions to merge or pull requests, but we would like to encourage to have like normal development practices in these repositories. So there are a few very basic rules which we want to propose to have and follow those. Like one thing is no one merges his own code. So it should be another person who merges the code. And second thing, like no, until it's reviewed, approved, the code is not merged. That's like the minimal basics. Another thing which I would like to propose is what we establish the rule what, like, if person from one company creates the PR, one person from another company like approves, merges it, just to make sure what, again, like something what is, how to say, seems to be a good idea for one company might not break another one. I think this rule is not really strict, but probably in the beginning it's good to follow. What others think?
I think
am I missing something?
I think that's good. I think that maybe just I suppose from my perspective, like I think approval is more important than who actually ends up merging it. So I would rather have the requirements harder on the reviewers than on, and say as soon as someone from someone that's not yourself, from ideally the other company that's busy driving this, a different company that's driving this, approves the pull request, then either they must then approve and merge directly, or once all approvals are in, then you can merge yourself. But I think it's more about the approvals in this case. But because I suppose that's my question is like, at which point does one then, if there are multiple reviewers, and does one then wait for everyone to give their okay, and on the last reviewer must then on approval merge, right?
I think we can start with a bit lighter process. So like if there are no objections or like change requests from our people, from our reviewers, when like as soon as the person approves it, when he can merge it, or he can delay the merge to get the opinion from our. Like, first of all, we are not that many people, so it's always possible to ping each other in the Slack.
Yeah.
Second thing, it's only about like in the conflicts of opinions. But as soon as we don't have objections, as soon as we have approval, I don't see reasons to delay the merge.
Okay, that's fine. Do not merge PRs from your own company, right? That's what we said. So reviewers. And here specifically, we're currently Intel and NVIDIA, right? There's no other people really active at the moment, or?
Yes, we don't have really active people from other companies, but on the other hand, we have, in theory, Mike Brown from IBM who potentially interested in the subject. We have somebody from Red Hat. Like previously it was Urvashi, but I don't know if she's maybe busy, or maybe I just need to contact her again. But let's see, we might ask, maybe somebody else will be joining those.
Okay. And okay, so basically the should be fine, right?
Sorry, to check. My browser window wasn't on our screen.
Sorry, yeah, no. So I think I said basically the points are no one merges their own code. One should not merge PRs from must not, I suppose is the language here. Must not merge PRs from your own org. Okay, so I just use org as the general term here, and reviewers should be selected from other orgs. And if there are no changes requested, the last reviewer basically approves and merges the PR.
Yep, sounds right.
Okay, and I think that I think that will allow us to get the things unstuck. And we have a channel, right? That we use specifically for this, or is this we don't have an explicit Slack channel? We have the group that we're all in. I think that we've been added to ad hoc. Do we want to create a channel where we can discuss, that we can ping for reviews, or is that something that we want to avoid? Don't know how channels work in the Kubernetes Slack, for example, or in the CNCF.
I think we can use the CNCF TAG-Runtime channel for this kind of discussions.
Okay.
It's not really alive, I would say. So like our discussions, if we have any, it will bump a bit of
so then we'll see be more active in that channel anyway, and say if there are delays in reviews, ping in TAG-Runtime Slack channel. Sorry, that should be for like, should we say general comments, or like, is that for discussion?
Well, if there are some discussions are needed.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if just ping is required, when it's easier to ping someone directly.
Individuals, yeah. So, and we'll just use the TAG-Runtime Slack channel for discussions.
Yeah.
Okay. Should this should probably be added to a contributing document or something on the page, right?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay, so I can add an action item to do that. If
I think we don't have any contributing text on the GitHub.
There is contributing, it's just got sign your work, right? So basically we can, I can just add a, maybe just add a quick section there on etiquette around merge requests. Now I just got to find this document again. Okay, too many tabs. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so I'll do that.
Thanks, Evan.
No problem.
All right, what others think? Did we forget anything? Oh, we are good with that topic.
Anyone else? Anything? Sorry, this is.
I think that was quite comprehensive. So at least I cannot think of anything else.
Yeah, and if we see any issues with doing it this way, or anything needs to be refined, like we can revisit this. I don't think this is set in stone. So yeah, feedback and comments once we have a bit more activity would be welcome, and then we can go on off that.
Yep. Good. So let's switch to second our topic regarding to like vacation and overall efficiency of a library. Ed or Christian, do you want to talk about that?
So I can want that. Okay, go ahead.
I can start, you can continue. So like it's inefficient in a way that it scans all, like everything on every call. I mean, like if we have a lot of CDI, a lot of files for different devices on the CDI, etc CDI directory. So like each call, like to like find the device would trigger like the rescan of all files. So that's inefficient, and it's in some cases, like if we, for example, would propose to call it from CRI or containerd, and some like core code of those, it can be like even dangerous, like it can just like block the like everything there. So we need to come up with more elegant solution, I would say. Christian, you can continue.
Yeah, so I think that it's clearly designed with a client in mind and not really infrastructure. So I think this is fine for a client. So something like Podman or, you know, even in CTR, where you do this once for the lifetime of the process and then it goes away, or it doesn't matter even if you do a couple of times. But for something like runtime, it's not very good. Plus, it has these undesirable side effects that, for instance, if you're in the runtime, so a typical usage scenario is that you scan your devices and then you want to ask basically the library that, hey, is this a CDI device or not? And it might happen, for instance, that if somebody is just installing some CDI files, that first it will say yes, and then it will say no, or the other way around. So you cannot even guarantee at the moment sort of atomic an atomic view of the installed CDI device set, which is another problem, I think. So it's just a corner case, but it would be nice if there would be caching and there would be control over the caching. So either so that the library user could control when you refresh the cache, or if it was automatic, then the library user could block the refreshing of the cache, so that somehow you could ensure that you are operating on a consistent snapshot of the CDI device set. There are also a number of other problems, I think, with the API. So for instance, there are functions, so exported functions which are taking a CDI, so a slice of CDI specs, but there is no function to load a slice of CDI specs from the file system. So there are functions for that, but none of them are exported. So in a way, it's a little bit like a single-handed giant, you know, that yes, it can take a CDI spec for you, but it doesn't offer you a function for acquiring those CDI specs. So I think so these should be fixed one by one. Then so I have a couple of other things with the API. So for instance, so many things are a little bit vaguely defined. So so if you look at the code, so for instance, now it is so that in principle, the CDI library this library can resolve for you a device which is not explicitly a fully qualified. So it is not explicitly stated to be a CDI device. So it is not in the vendor/device equals device name form. But then the function which is checking for this is then erroring out. So half of the functions are expecting and gracefully handling such a device. In all cases, half of the functions are only handling them if such a device turns out to be a CDI device. So it would be nice to clean all these problems somehow up.
Yeah, I think I did. I think I've started working to generate CDI specs for NVIDIA devices, and that's obviously on one side of the problem. But yeah, I think in terms of it feels to me as if one of the solutions for the problem around caching is to decouple the spec itself from the file system, right? So that, yes, we may provide utility functions to load a number of specs, files representing CDI specs from the file system, but that would not be the requirement, right? Whereas I think the existing functions in the API actually require that to a large extent, right? Like, as you say, anything that you do with it basically rescans the folders.
Yeah.
And it would be left up to I think, not building refreshing and things like that into the spec is probably the better solution. I don't think we want to be prescriptive in terms of when things should be refreshed or not.
Yeah,
we should
that.
Yeah, so I would say that given a spec, an instance of a spec, a particular snapshot, we should define the transitions from that to OCI spec modifications, right? Like that's sort of basically what the purpose of the spec is. And it is up to client or runtime implementations to decide when that is refreshed, right?
And how is it acquired? Yeah, I also like this because this is a sort of orthogonality of the API. So you have some functions which you are using or you are not using to acquire the CDI specs. And there are some other functions where you are feeding a CDI spec, which you acquired whichever way you desire and fits for you. So this orthogonality is usually a nice property of the API. Things are not grown together hopelessly. So I think I agree with you.
And with regards to, I think the slices of specs and things like that, I think the spec is still in such a state that we could definitely make the change to require a vendor / device, like require a particular format. I understand that some of these workarounds are in place for handling the all devices, or like let's call them meta devices or something like that. But I think those could still be prefixed with using the vendor kind pattern. So if that solves or at least simplifies the way we are able to reason about what should be happening in these methods that are exposed by the API, then I think that would be something that would be beneficial going forward. Because we don't want to deal with generic devices, right? Because even from a client perspective, you're providing a device flag and then some name. And now you have to decide whether that is a device on the host, a device node on the host that you're wanting to include in the sort of, let's call it standard mechanisms for that client, or if you need to interpret that as a CDI device and sort of being more, it's almost restrictive in terms of CDI devices, allowing us to quickly filter or identify whether it is a CDI device would be advantageous. And maybe not using a slice of, maybe to bubble up the spec so that the vendor and kind, so the vendor key or something like that is at the root of the spec to some extent might make sense. I don't know if that makes sense, or if having it as a slice of specs that are not non-deterministic, but like not as well defined as a sort of, whether that is required or whether having the vendors like sort of a specs struct or a concept where it's keyed by vendor, so that is the root and allows us to more quickly find whether these devices are actually valid once a spec has been loaded or partially loaded.
So one of the things what we discussed with Christian was to actually fix the function which detects is it CDI device or not. So right now, this function is returning error situation in any or well in most of the scenarios, and you cannot distinguish those errors. So what we thought is we need to have like helper functions, one to say like, is it really CDI device or not? Is it system device, like standard like dev something or not? And if it's CDI device, then it should return answer like it's something what we know or something which we don't have spec for.
Yeah, but related to this, so I think that, so if I understood what the previous suggestion was, that can we switch? So it was a pondering about that. Can we switch to an always explicitly defined fully defined CDI definition? Because now it is so that you can give it whatever device name, and in principle, if there is a CDI device definition shadowing that device, even if that device exists under dev as a dev node, then in a way you can use CDI now to virtualize a device. So for instance, dev null could be replaced with something else if you provide a dev null CDI definition for it. But I never understood whether this is intentional, or so was this by design, or did it just happen?
It's probably just happened. The idea was like we have vendor part of device ID, and when we have actual device ID.
Okay.
Right. So if this device ID is unique, we hope it what user can just specify like I want, like let's take example like NVIDIA 0 for the card, right? So it doesn't need, we don't need to user to force saying like nvidia.com/NVIDIA 0.
Yeah.
So
okay.
that was
the
the
ID.
reason.
Okay.
Yes, but that also implies what we're supposed to validate, what this like part after vendor doesn't contain, for example, like slashes. So where JSON file should not have like dev null as an identifier of the device. So we probably just need to add a bit more validation parts into a schema and into a library.
So I think this is also something that should actually be, I don't know if this should be handled by the spec or could be added as sort of helpers to the clients that want to onboard it, right? Like, because I think the spec and interactions with the spec itself should actually use call it the fully qualified device ID, which includes the vendor designation and the device type designation, as well as the device ID. And one could, I think, let's say you want, I'm just looking at the doc, at the README, and there's an example of my device, right? If you want my device to work that way, then it should be a previous step, right? To sort of say, okay, well, find this my device in all vendors or for a specific vendor or through a config option in the runtime. I understand that maybe moves away from having a unified spec and unified sort of point of interaction with or a way of interacting with all runtimes and clients. But I think that, I think I'd be definitely open for being a bit more restrictive in this case, because it makes it easier for us to identify when CDI should actually be used. Otherwise, one sort of has to rely on heuristics, right?
Yeah, and that's not good.
Which I would rather be more restrictive initially, at least. And then if we see that once we have more understanding of what the actual usage patterns are, then we can say, okay, you can have aliases for your devices or something like that, which you can configure on a per installation basis or something like that, right? Like, or at some root CDI config that maps an ID, like my device, to some specific vendor device, right? Like that sort of, I would see as an alternative solution to.
Right now, we don't have support for this kind of aliases. So I would suggest let's think about that a bit later.
Yeah, so we drop it from the example and basically ensure that our API works with fully qualified like IDs, device IDs.
Yeah. So what is the use case for the all? So this wildcard device.
So that.
Go ahead.
So yeah, a common sort of let's say if you are starting a container which is supposed to monitor devices or something like that, right? Like then one has this idea of, or you just want to start a container that has access to everything. Okay. That is one of the ways that we document usage on the NVIDIA side of things. Okay. But because that's still qualified, like it's still qualified in the sense of you still have your vendor and your device type indicated there, like that all is, it's called a unique ID that maps to all devices for that vendor and kind. But we could also say that is not supported initially and expand from there, right?
Or
we could also generate that in the spec. Like we could also generate that.
It should be its own. It should be its own spec. Is how I didn't realize it wasn't its own spec. It should be its own spec. It should just be its own ID, the same way everything else is an ID.
Yeah. So maybe that's exactly what yeah. So as a vendor, if you want the all device to be visible to clients, then the spec you generate has all as the actual device ID, and that just maps to all the devices. So you're duplicating some of the spec, I suppose.
What if you have dynamic devices? I mean, like something like USB, which can dynamically come and go. How do you do that with the all in this implementation?
Oh, that I suppose wouldn't make sense then, right?
The spec.
Yeah, then the spec has to be dynamic as well.
Okay, so then you would generate it basically on a UDEV event, and that's it. And then you would remove it when the UDEV event comes for removing the device.
It's similar to what we've talked about with what's called multi-instance GPUs with NVIDIA devices, where you can kind of dynamically reconfigure them into smaller subsets of a full GPU. We've gone back and forth about the right way to do it, and in the end, the only real kind of consistent way to do it is to regenerate the spec after you've reconfigured the GPU, which is similar to a hot plug USB device.
Okay.
So one question I had until Evan proposed his way of doing the caching was, how would you handle cases like this? If you were having the runtimes cache the contents of these specs, because they need to make sure that they get the updated information if the spec ever changes.
So the runtimes wouldn't cache basically indefinitely. So the problem currently with the runtime is that if you are using two different functions, for instance, one to decide whether a device is a CDI device or not, and in between somebody is changing the configuration, then you are not operating on a consistent snapshot of CDI devices. And this is the thing. So that's the only thing that I really would like to sort of somehow, even the principle, because I'm not saying this is very probable to happen, but it really can happen. And I think that's the only thing that I would like to disable somehow with this caching. And I think that this proposal further that let's separate the loading functions from so let's get rid of the automatic loading and rescanning, and let's provide those as two orthogonal set of functions. So you can use one set to load the CDI specs, and then you are explicitly feeding those CDI specs to the public functions. Then I think that works fine, because then you can control everything. So runtime can control it, the client can control it, everybody. So
and like scanning and scanning directory and statu files is quite cheap operation compared to all like open and parsing things. So we can easily refresh, or we can easily detect if reload is needed. That's one variant. The second variant, what we discussed with Christian, is FS notify. So if we just monitor the directories where those files are located, so we can provide this function into the library, which will be monitoring the directory, and as soon as the directory changes, we can refresh the content of the cache. Like as a separate goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because I don't see, other than something like MIG or these hot plug USB devices, I feel like it might be rare to really have these changing all too often.
Well, in our case, we don't really have this like really pluggable devices, but possibility exists. Like some of the VPU devices. It's not directly USB, but similar approach. It's also hot pluggable, yes. Anyway, so it looks like no objections. So and let's prototype it and then continue with part of the discussion in VPRs.
I probably have a question. So when I started to work on like with this API, I was surprised that like knowing the exact device ID doesn't give me a possibility to like read just like one file. So because like if we could come up with some kind of naming convention for the files, that's because it's very like often use case like on the client side. So you're given the bunch of IDs of the CDI devices, and you want them like inside the container. And just wondering, would it be possible to do it without scanning all the files on the like? Yep.
I don't think it's really a viable solution because the initial idea of spreading it across multiple JSON files was exactly to avoid the situation. So like you might have vendor specific like defaults where, for example, you have defined like the hooks which needs to be injected anyway, or like some bind mounts which needs to be injected anyway. And when you have a dynamically generated like instances of the devices where you have device specific information. So to get the full spec which needs to be added, you potentially need like multiple content from multiple JSON files, right?
Oh, potentially yes, but how often?
But what's the thing? What's the thing with that cache object? So like if we separate this in library as a like one object which can handle like load and refreshing the state, and this object can have a function which says, give me all the parsed information for device XYZ. So you don't need to know the file name.
That's good for the like daemon kind of use case, like container D or whatever, that actually can benefit from having this cache. But I'm talking about the the client use case. That the cache and refreshing the cache, it's just meaningless in this case.
Well, it will be just like one-time shoot operation to read the content, and like yes, the cache afterwards will be
like all devices that are present on the system, like all CDI files, just to get the one spec for one device. If one ID is passed to the client,
you don't know if it's one device ID or multiple.
Yeah. Well, it's
so like nothing prevents you to say like Docker run device A, device B, device C, device.
Yeah, but I will not specify like 1,000 devices there. So usually it's like 1, 2, 3, like just a very limited amount of devices. But
is that a problem if you are talking about the client? Because basically this. So I think it's so we should be careful that. So what happens on the client side is automatically getting amortized among all the clients. So even if it's not fully optimized for the client use case, I think it's much more dangerous if we sacrifice basically performance in the runtime, because then everybody is paying the price for that.
Yeah, I agree. Like few milliseconds on the client side doesn't really comparable to.
So the only compromise I can think of. The only compromise I can think of would be that the vendor would be required to have a single vendor file, which is describing all the devices that belongs to that vendor. And then you could have it so that since we agreed that we will provide always fully qualified CDI, CDI name, which includes the vendor and the device, then you could try to optimize it so that you are only loading that vendor file. But I don't know whether this is so this might be a really bad idea. I don't know.
I suppose what about vendor specific folders? I think that was one of the issues.
Yeah,
one of the issues.
Just wanted to say that. Yeah.
So does that make sense to namespace at least per vendor? Have a root that is sort of like all or something where cross-vendor files come, which I don't know whether those are actually a use case, but then have vendor-specific folders under /etc/CDI or whatever.
My suggestion, before we start to like with micro optimizations, I would suggest let's implement like the first simple thing, like file name.
Let's get it working first.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's make it working.
And let's not optimize it if it's not needed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like all kind of naming conventions or like with subdirectories and so on, it's just like
extra complexity.
It's not only extra complexity, it's potential place for errors. Like some people just like mistype or something else. So let's a bit simplify the life.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think moving to the yeah, I suppose another maybe it's not related to this particular thing, but currently the location of where these files are stored is hard coded, and that should also be actually I suppose an input to the loading functions, right? Like so
Yeah.
that the root, the CDI root should be
So what we thought with Christian last week when we discussed is for this loading or cache object, we need to provide as a parameter a list of directories where to monitor the files.
Yeah.
And if this list is empty, then we fall back to the hard-coded value.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so gentlemen, time check. So we have 7 minutes left. If we are done with that topic, I would like to ask if we have something else we want to discuss today.
I don't know if it makes sense to discuss without Mike, but I would like to discuss the way we are going with containerd, because I created a PR, and Christian, thank you for reviewing it and suggesting how to fix those CI errors. And the had only like one review from containerd maintainer. Hopefully, I don't know who is the reviewer, but it was like the question was obvious. So why do we need two mechanisms for the same thing?
It was Akihiro who was putting that comment there,
Yeah.
I think. And basically, if I understood, so he was asking that if we do this, why do we try to do this also in the runtime side? I mean, with NRI, that was his question. But your answer, I think, was I think you gave the answer that we can give. We cannot give him any other answer. We do not know how long it will take to get NRI. So get the extensions that we suggest to NRI accepted, and then get those merged to CRI or to and containerd. And we don't know even if this will be accepted by both projects and it will ever happen. So that's the truth that we don't know at this point. So what can you do? Have plan A, plan B, and then
so Ed, if I can ask you, can you please put your pull request numbers into the meeting notes so others who are present here might also have a look?
I can just put the okay.
And maybe on that comment with, I suppose this question will come up regularly as to why not do it this way, why not do it. Maybe do we have an FAQ or something somewhere that we can write this out? Like, why not do this using NRI, right? Like, and then we say, because this is the reason, see these. Is there some way to do that? Or do we add an FAQ to the README?
Good question.
Well, I think this question is kind of
related to the PR.
Related to containerd, because NRI only presents at least at the moment in containerd. So CRI people wouldn't ask it, but it's a valid and obvious question. And actually, my answer was discussed previously here with Mike, and we decided that this is a kind of short-term solution, and NRI is a long-term solution. But I'm not sure containerd people would buy it. That's so if you guys have suggestions or can go and comment on the PR, that would be great.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it was more a question of like for these kinds of questions related to PRs that come up as to like, well, why are we doing it this way now? At which point do we decide to make it more, capture that in documentation, right? Like capture that decision in the repository so that that is clear to anyone reading the spec or the documentation surrounding the spec. But if we think this is once-off and only related to containerd, then it's not necessary to do that.
Well, Actually, Mike mentioned on the latest meeting, like one thing that actually makes great sense, that Containerd now has 3 pending PRs, like for updating the spec. So, and that kind of sounds ridiculous. So it's not just CDI, but like other people also want to update it at some point, and so this is going to be like to grow. I mean, it looks like a bunch of hacks, and they are worrying that they would probably need some plugin mechanism, which is NRI or something like that. So and I'm kind of suspecting that the same thing can happen for other runtimes as well. So we need to be prepared for these kind of questions, and I don't know. I don't have
the whole idea behind NRI is actually to provide such a pluggable mechanism. So all those things what we're currently trying to implement, it's easily possible. But the question of how fast we can merge that thing.
Yes, so I would propose to you guys who are interested in this to look at the PR, and probably also at the NRI related PRs or draft PRs. Like Christian can actually provide you links, and we should decide for the project, so which way we are going to do it. So maybe we should just concentrate on the NRI approach and make it happen faster somehow, like just by putting like more resources in it, or we should come up with some explanations. So why we want like to go like this quick way first, and then.
So is this a block? So the lack of CDI support in Containerd, so is it blocking something that we really would like to achieve as quickly as possible in upstream?
Potentially, it can break this resource, like whatever this cap, which is like driven by Patrick. So this is kind of low-level support for it. So
okay. Okay. So that's the primary reason why we would like to get that in as soon as possible. So if it's blocking something, then I think that because I don't know how much we can speed up the NRI part. So, you know, so in some way we can speed it up, but that's a big bunch of things to digest by the community. And I the digesting, so it's not the implementation part, it's the digestion part, I think, which takes, it takes time. And this, you know, this 9 mother, 1 month, 1 baby is usually not working.
Yeah, I understand.
So in these type of things, so I'm not sure, and I see that would work. So we can try it, but if we really think that, so I think that the quickest and surest way to unblock something, it would be probably what you are doing. So first doing the client side integration, so remove the blocker, and if and when we get an NRI in, then remove that part and say that you can achieve the same thing with loading an NRI plugin. So I think that would be maybe a sort of sustainable approach, so that you are neither blocking those who need CDI nor slowing them down.
Well, the thing is that the PR that I prepared is just a part of, like, it's the simplest thing, just to, you know, to see how people would react. The part we are interested in, and the part that is actually blocking this resource allocation cap, is the CRI part, because Kubelet will work with runtime and works through CRI. So like implementing it on the client side wouldn't help this.
So but in the kubelet, so when I was prototype So do you mean that we're suspecting that if you would put currently into the CRI protocol a reference to a CDI as a device, then it would not come through the pipeline because somebody would check on the other side something about it and it would violate some checks?
No, it's a bit different. So the PR I proposed is for the client side. It's like very simple PR, but to unblock the resource allocation cap, we need to do this like
In the runtime
in the runtime. Yeah, and I have this part as well. I just didn't submit the PR.
Okay. So that's what you meant. Okay, now
yes.
I misunderstood. Okay.
Validation is a little bit of concern, but that's not a big deal. So if Containerd and CRI would accept this support in their core part, then we would somehow solve the other problems, I believe.
Okay.
So that's probably it from about this. So guys who are interested, please have a look, and if you have any ideas, just comment on the PR or just, I don't know, tell me how to proceed. And I hope that Mike will be like when he is back from his vacation, he will help with this, or at least will clear it out for us.
Yeah, Mike's supposed to be back in a few days.
Okay, this pull request is basically using this, let's call it the API that implicitly loads the specs and stuff now, right?
Yes.
Which,
well, the existing API, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So if we do change that, then that would need to be changed in this pull request as well.
Yeah, and in Podman.
Yeah.
But maybe we should version it. So maybe we should do it so that we leave this now alone, so that we are not disrupting basically adds this part. And if we change the API, maybe we should version it differently. That would be, I don't know what is the current version. Is it 0? And then that could be 1, so that we have a properly versioned API in CDI.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, 0. I think currently is 0.2, I believe, but it's actually just 0.0.0. I don't think there's any tags or anything. So the repository isn't tagged at all, and meaning that the Go modules aren't actually versioned either. So we can tag the existing version with I believe it's 0.2.0, and then we could bump that. Obviously, updating this to version 1 or later is going to signal readiness that we're possibly not yet ready to signal. So just keep that in mind.
Obviously not.
Yeah, so I would say like we can like keep the version pinned for the existing one, and then rather just bump the minor, although this is not strictly SEMVer compliant if we actually break the API. Yeah, or have these functions still present in the new API, but provide new functions that are the recommended mechanism and don't load the files, for example, right? Like that's sort of the other option, I suppose.
Yeah, we can think about this migration.
Yeah.
Once we will have some draft idea of new APIs, when we can think about those backward compatibility.
Okay, so Christian, are you going to be driving the new API? Sorry, I think we're over time now, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. So who is there a specific person that's looking at that, or is that just is this just general discussion and we need to add these as a list of issues? And I suppose the question is who is then doing that? So that do we have a specific person that will be looking at that?
I think so I don't know will be that, to be honest, because I think it a little bit depends on that how each of us is busy on our side with stuff. But I think how we could go about this is that we could make a proposal about the new API as a sort of so internally, and then maybe file a issue for it that hey, okay, this would be our proposal for a cleaned up API, and then review that and basically go by that. And definitely I will be participating. I don't know whether I will be the one who is driving it. So I think it would be me, Sasha, and Ed on our side, and Patrick probably.
Okay, but in terms of concrete next steps, you will create an issue proposing, making some proposals.
Yes, we can take that up, that we will create the proposal. We will create an issue about the proposal. So come up with the proposal for the API and create an issue about that and then review that. I think that we can take.
Yeah, okay. So,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be at least to start the process, I would say. Like that's the important thing from our side, not that so that there's someone that is looking at that. There's not just a doc.
Yes.
Okay.
We can do that.
Cool. Thank you very much.
One short question. Ivan and Kevin, have you had chance to look at the NRI, you know, like at least like a bird view on it?
Not yet. From my side, I know about Kevin, but I haven't yet.
I have not, no.
Okay. Well, one request, if you have some free time.
Very interested in basically this.
Go ahead, Christian.
So basically, if you're interested in resource management, interested in these runtime, so these related things, then, and if you have the time, then it would be great also for us if you could take a look at it and then you know, give some feedback. That what do you think? Is there something missing? Is it too much? Is it the wrong approach? Is it the right approach? So any kind of feedback.
We need some fresh eyes on it. We think we included everything what like can cover our use cases, including like the CDI work. But if you might notice something what we missed.
Can you guys point us to the proper?
I can put it. So do you want me? Should I put it here in the chat?
Yeah.
Well,
probably
add it to the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll add it there. Okay, yes.
All right, good. So on that note, I think we can close for today, right? Or anything else?
No, that's it, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Talk to you in 2 weeks.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.